World War fun and German kills none. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is February 1st, 2021. And on this date in history, sorry, I'm cheating, going back to Saturday, on January 30th, January 30th, 1968, the Tet Offensive happened. This is a turning point in Vietnam. Johnson had told the American people that the war was over in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese had actually declared a truce, a short truce, so that they could celebrate their New Year. And instead, they staged a massive attack. It was a military disaster, but a political victory. So, made everyone here doubt the war. Well, hello, history fans. This is Mr. Dugdale, and it's time for us to play a little bit of World War One, the game where around 10 million people on Earth and inadvertently another 100 to 150 million people will die as a result of some of the effects that happened from this, and we'll talk about that, this, and more, all on this episode of Dual Credit U.S. History. So let's look at the causes of World War One. Okay, I've got it really summed up into three things. So number one is going to be alliances, and one of the big problems going into the war is it had been 99 years since the last major war, so no one had any grandparents or great grandparents that were still alive from that war that could remember it. So you have the haves and the have-nots kind of coming up together. So on the one hand, you have the haves. Okay, this is a triple entente. This is Britain, France, and Russia. Britain's vampire, but more importantly, let's talk about Britain's empire. Britain's empire was so vast that it could be said that the sun never sets on the British Empire, and it was true. They had territories on every continent of the world except for Antarctica, and there literally was not a time during the day whenever part of their empire didn't have the sun shining on it. So you have France, which also had a lot of territories, and Russia was the largest landed empire in the world, just one single nation. Okay, the Triple Alliance. You have Germany. This is a new nation that becomes a nation in 1871. They united through force, kind of pushing their way through Europe, bullying people until they put together their nation and crowned their new emperor in Versailles, right outside of Paris. They crowned him in the Hall of Mirrors, Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now you hear the word Kaiser in there. Kaiser comes from Caesar, and so when they talk about the First Reich, they're talking about Rome. The Second Reich would be the Holy Roman Empire, led by Charlemagne, and then the Third Reich would be Berlin, under Hitler, but this is long before Hitler. Hitler's born during the time period we're talking about, but not when Wilhelm made himself emperor. Italy became a nation in 1881 through alliances, not through brute force like Germany. And Austria-Hungary was, Austria, those are people that speak Germans and have a lot of the same German customs. And then Hungary represented the Hungarian people, but it also represented about 20 other different people that didn't really have a home but were forced to be part of Austria-Hungary. Number two on this list is nationalism, and this is a extreme patriotism for your people. Okay, it's not necessarily your kingdom, but it is the people that are like you, and every people wanted their own country. Okay, and in many cases to prove what their country was worth. And then last but not least here, I have industrial militarism, okay? And this is nations building up weapons through mass production. So you are mass producing war for the first time in history. And all of these things together are going to basically put together a massive powder keg that needs nothing but a little fuse to kind of set on its way. So, now for the fuse. Okay, Sarajevo. Okay, once the capital of Serbia. Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
The capital city of Serbia is Belgrade, Palila, Serbia.
Shut up. Sorry. Siri thought that I needed her help on something. So, Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, the term Archduke actually refers to prince. So, he was next in line to be the Kaiser or Emperor of Austria-Hungary. And he is in Serbia, and they're trying to put down a little revolution that's going on. And the thought was he was going to go to City Hall, give a speech, inspire the people, everyone would cheer for him, and he would become a hero before he became king. Okay, so that's the idea of him being in Sarajevo. But there were people protesting because it was the anniversary of whenever Serbia was destroyed as a nation. So people were going through the streets, okay, just furious, picketing, screaming at the royal family. So the idea was to drive into town. Well, so they drive past this group of protesters, and in this group of protesters, there's about 20 members of Black Hand. This is a terrorist organization that found out that whenever they were trying to kidnap someone, they accidentally killed them, and whenever they did, it changed policy, so it kind of scared people into doing things, and they thought it was an effective tool to create change. So Franz Ferdinand was going in to speak to Parliament that day when, as they were driving past the crowd, they remembered they forgot something. So they turned around, drove right past the crowd again, went home, grabbed something, and then went back towards Parliament. So they passed by them 3 times, okay, infuriating them just a little bit more each time. They go and they speak before at City Hall in town, and then they come back and they're passing right by this crowd for a 4th time, and Gavrilo Princip just couldn't handle it anymore. So whenever they were pulling up, he just walked up to Franz Ferdinand and killed him and his wife Sophia. Okay, bang bang, 2 caps. Now they're dead. Okay, so immediately the Serbians that lived in Austria-Hungary became targets. They asked Russia for some help. Russia was like, okay. And so Austria declared war on part of their own country, the Serbs. Then Russia was trying to be considered whether or not they should get involved in the war. And Germany declares war on France and then on Russia. And then they decide to invade Belgium, and this draws Britain into the war. So basically, this one assassination of this worthless man and his worthless wife start a world war. Okay, so once war breaks out, the sides change a little bit. You have France, Russia, and Great Britain, and Italy decides to change sides. Now, a little lesson for anyone who goes into a world war. If Italy is on your side at the beginning of the war, don't necessarily think they'll be there at the end of the war. So these 4 countries, along with all the other purple ones on the map there, will eventually be part of a group called the Allies. On the other side, you have the Central Powers, and this is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and they also enlist the Ottoman Empire into their group, which was also known as the Sick Man of Europe. Okay, you can see a few green countries, but you can see that the vast majority of the world was fighting against Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. And the truth was, almost all of this was done by the Germans. Most Americans didn't want anything to do with the war. Okay? So the British used propaganda or information to influence opinion, because they wanted to get the industrial might of the United States behind them. Right here you can see a piece of propaganda where you see a German soldier pulling on the hand of a little girl, and it implies that one of a few things is going to happen. He's going to kill her, he's going to rape her, or he's just going to beat her senseless. This was the image given to Americans, okay? And part of this was because of how much we had on the Allied side. We had made so many loans to England and France that we didn't have quite as much invested in the German economy. Okay? And on the radio, they would broadcast all types of horrible stories, like one, that the Germans were raping nuns, and two, that they were bayoneting babies. Okay? A bayonet is the knife on the end of your gun that's used to fight in close quarters. And it was said that they would play a game where they would take a baby by the ankles, throw it up as high in the air as they could, and then catch it on the end of their bayonets. Okay? Horrible story. By the way, the whole thing of the Germans raping nuns and bayoneting babies turns out to be it's all false. It's fake. Now, the type of fighting that they had was the same as was fought in the Civil War and introduced briefly in the Crimean War. So Germany and France are actually going to fight along the same lines for 4 years with very little change happening during that time. No Man's Land is the area between the trenches, which was basically just a killing field where a bunch of dead bodies laid until the war was over. In many battles, both sides lost several 100,000 men. Now, during the Civil War, the way to overcome trench warfare was to rush the other side. And it was said then, and the French still believed this, really until the end of World War I, that if you were brave enough, that the gunfire wouldn't take you down. Now, the thought behind this, while that sounds like a stupid statement, they're normally about 250 yards away from each other, the two trenches. So basically what you do is you wait till the other side completely fires, and once they get off their shot, it's going to be about 30 seconds for them to reload. This is the technology that was there during the Civil War. So during that time, if you're on the other side, you could jump up and then rush the other side. So 250 yards is going to take you somewhere around 30 to 45 seconds to get across. So you're running as hard and as fast as you can, screaming, while the person on the other side is trying to reload their gun. And the odds are that by the time they're able to reload and fire, you're going to be right there on top of them, and you'll either be firing your gun or jumping over and bayoneting them. So if you could be brave enough and ferocious enough, you might cause someone else to, lose their concentration for a small second, but just enough for you to get over there to ruin them. During World War I, they developed the machine gun, which didn't take 30 seconds to reload. And if you're running across to fight against it, basically you could take and cover your eyes if you were aimed in the right direction and just randomly move the gun around, and you would wipe out everyone that was fighting against you. Now, the question of death from the other side, from the machine gun, was nothing compared to what it was like just being in the trenches. You spent more time digging than you did shooting. Lice was a terrible problem, to the point that 97% of the people in the trenches had lice. Okay, and a condition known as trench fever was really prevalent from in all the trenches on both sides. Not only that, but if someone died, you had to bury them in the same trench that you were living in. If you had to go to the bathroom, you went in the same trench that you were living in. You were in there 24/7, 7 days a week. And poison gas also becomes a major problem during this time. They have 3 different types of poison gases. They've got a lacrimator, which is a tearing agent, kind of like tear gas or pepper spray that we have today. If anyone here has been pepper sprayed before, that's very mild. It's kind of like the difference between, I would say, like a bell pepper and a ghost pepper in just how much it burns. You have an asphyxiant, which chlorine gas would cause your lungs to burn. Then they'd fill up with fluid, and you'd basically drown without being near any water. Then you also had mustard gas. And mustard gas was a blistering agent which would cover your entire body in blisters so severe that it would any place where you had moisture is where they'd really hit. So your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, your underarms, the fold in your arm right on the other side of your elbow, and then in your front and rear crotchal regions, they would be so covered in blisters that anytime you moved, they would split open. It was quite brutal and painful, and many times this condition would last you for anywhere from 3 to 5 months. And so you might be blind for 3 to 5 months while you're trying to recover from that. Other things, the Zeppelin was used to spy, and so it would go at high distances, see troop movements, and try and figure out what you were trying to do, and it could do that with a lot of skill at that height. The machine gun could fire about 2.5 shots every second, which meant that you didn't have to be accurate at all, you just needed to fire it in the direction of other people. The flamethrower. There's really only one reason that you have a flamethrower, and that is to, brutally massacre someone. And basically you could hit a target from about 60 yards away. By World War II, they doubled that distance. So if you get hit by a flamethrower, you're going to roast alive. It's going to cook off all your skin. You're going to die in agony. Now, the tanks were used also in World War I, but they weren't really successful because of the terrain and also the inefficiency of the engines. So, they had a very short range. They were powerful when they were in use, but for the most part, you don't want to be in a train at that point. They could start a fire, an explosion underneath, and it just cooked everyone inside the train and inside the tank. Hopefully not a train near the battlefield. That's not kind of how they work. Airplanes during this time were really used for spying. But eventually they're going to drop small bombs and eventually be involved in dogfights. Now, there are more aces that come out of World War I than any other war. This is the first time that people have been able to fly, and so the plane is invented in 1903, 1914 the fighting starts, and then they start finding ways to strap guns to the planes to fight each other. Now, in the beginning, you have the pilot doing all the shooting because there's not room for a lot of people up there. So everything was done by line of sight. So they didn't destroy their propellers. At first, what they would do is they would put up like a bulletproof steel on top of the propellers so that the bullets would bounce off of those. But it was a little bit blinding for the pilots. Eventually, they would develop this machine that made it so it fired between the blades. Okay, and that makes it very effective. Now, the greatest ace of all time is Manfred von Richthofen. Okay, you see him. He's the guy on the bottom right. He's also known as the Red Baron. He actually shoots down about 80 planes, and the crazy thing is he does most of this before he turns 17. In fact, he only lives to be about 19 years old. And if you look at that picture down there, that's a hard 19 in that picture. René Fonck was number 2. He was a French pilot, shot down 75 planes. Canadian William Bishop shot down 72. In England, the British pilot Edward Manock shot down 61. The U.S., the number 1 pilot was Eddie Rickenbacker, who shoots down 26 planes. In fairness, he was only there for about 9 months. And in Russia, you have Alexei Kazakov. Okay, so just to look at some of the pilots. But again, they were mainly used to spy. Now, the Germans, because they could not really compete with the navy of the British put a blockade around Germany, cutting out most supplies from anywhere other than Germany. And so Britain had this great blockade around it. So the Germans developed these U-boats or submarines, or U-boat means Unterseeboot, and they went and they would sink any ship that got near Britain. That was their way of fighting back against the British blockade. So while they're destroying all these ships, they sink the Lusitania. This was a passenger ship. There were 1,260 people on the ship. or no, there were 1,198 people on the ship that were killed. Okay, 128 of them were Americans. This infuriated the Americans, and of course, we wanted revenge. And if you know anything about the United States, eventually we will get it. So, irony. Okay, Wilson was reelected on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Okay, so elected on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Right after he was reelected, though, we declared war on Germany. So a whole lot of irony just kind of smacks him in the face. Okay, he beat Charles Hughes, who was one of those worthless politicians that would change whatever he was saying based on whoever he was speaking to. Really kind of an annoying thing. So, due to the fallout from the Lusitania and Wilson's promises to stay out of the war, the Germans make a promise to the United States to keep us out of the war. And it's basically that they'll stop sinking merchant ships, so we don't go into fight. So that's in February of 1917. Okay. By April of 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, and basically to kind of put things into perspective, on the left-hand side, each one of those little black dots represents a ship that was sunk by the Germans during this time period. Okay, and you can see there are hundreds, if not thousands, of little black dots. But if you move to the right-hand side of the screen, those are only ships that were sunk between May 1917 and January 1918. So that's a total of 8 months. And in that 8-month period, you see how many more ships did they sink compared to the, 8 months before that. So that's kind of how this works. And Wilson, whenever we finally declare war, he basically is going to make a speech that says he's going to make the world safe for democracy. Okay. So the Zimmerman note. A German diplomat to the United States by the name of Arthur Zimmerman, he writes a letter to his brother who was in the Mexican, or to the German embassy in Mexico, and in that they make a deal that if Mexico helps Germany win World War I, then Mexico will get back the land that it lost to the United States during the Mexican War. Now, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not this is a forgery or if there's any credibility to this or not. But regardless, this is enough to be the final nail in the coffin. And just a few days after he is inaugurated, the U.S. will get into, 1 month after he's inaugurated, the U.S. will get involved in World War I. So, from the very beginning, we needed some kind of system for controlling information. And this is done through George Creel. He is part of a group called the Committee on Public Information. And their job is to sell the war to the American people, something that we haven't done in our last several conflicts. Okay? He had a group called the 4-Minute Men that would go around and give speeches in local theaters. So you might go in to see a play, or if you're wealthy, you might go in to see one of the early movies. And there you would hear, a couple of men, come and join the U.S. Army. We're gonna go fight the crowd. Come and join the U.S. Army. Then join in the victory shout. They do things like that, and people get all fired up, and they would join so they could become part of what the United States was doing. Now, at the same time that we're getting people geared up for the war, there's a lot of people here that are ready to attack German Americans. And so, they get rid of things like sauerkraut. They call it, independence lettuce or liberty cabbage. So several of the things, it's kind of childish, but it's a way of taking any German terms out since that's who we're fighting. The truth was there were a lot of Germans that didn't want to fight, and there were a lot of Irish that didn't want to fight on the side of the British. So, now, the Espionage Act. Okay, this is something that we have not spoken a lot about. The Espionage Act is, espionage itself is spying to get government secrets. Okay, and if you're caught doing this at this time, it brought the death penalty to you. Now, the Sedition Act, we're going back to much earlier, but it made it illegal to criticize the president or government. Okay, and as we all know, this really goes against your rights of freedom of speech. Now, can you limit freedom of speech? Well, in some cases, it's actually okay. So, Schenck versus U.S. ruled that the government could limit freedom of speech if there was a clear and present danger. Okay, this makes it so you can't run through the halls of a school building screaming, "I'm going to kill you all. I have the weapons to do it." Okay, that is a terroristic threat, and that's why you can't do something like that. That's the same reason you can't run into an airport and say bomb. Now, can you say bomb in an airport? Sure. The sound will come out of your mouth. But there's a good chance that you're really going to regret it later on, like if you're put on a no-fly list or if they do a full body cavity search to see if you are hiding a bomb in places that you probably wouldn't hide it. I won't say that where that is, but, it would not be pleasant to be searched there. Okay, so the War Industries Board. So the last thing you need is everyone making machine guns, everyone making, one certain supply or another. You don't want them doing that. You want them all to be coordinated. And so they coordinate the production of war materials and also the supplies that you need to make them. The National War Labor Board. This is led by William Howard Taft, the former president of the United States. And he's going to give raises to all the workers in factories and give them the 8-hour workday and the right to organize unions. And all of this is done with the agreement that they do not strike. And many women will move into these new factory jobs as a result of all the men going off to fight. So you still need people to take these jobs in factories and also working on the railroad as well. Now, all this opportunity, it's not just for women, but there's a large African American population in the South. And 500,000 African Americans will move north during the war for wartime jobs, and many of them will settle there and continue to stay there even once the war is over and everyone's returned home. So this is an opportunity for a lot of people to move to a part of the country they might not have otherwise. And there were several riots against African Americans moving to these new communities. There was a rather vicious one in St. Louis that led to the death of 40 African Americans and 9 white people. Okay, so Selective Service. 2.8 million Americans were drafted in a lottery. In this lottery, if you won, you got to go and fight. Now, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, those are registration cards for people that fought in World War I. Those actually belong to 3 of my 4 great-grandfathers. I'm not sure if my other one didn't sign up or what happened, but you have George Thomas Schrock, who's my mom's dad. You had Harold Austin Baker, which is my dad's mom's dad. And Squire Dugdale, who's my dad's dad's dad. Okay? I can do the same thing saying what they are to me, but you kind of get the gist from that. Okay? But African Americans will serve, but mainly in non-combat roles. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't serve in combat, but for the most part, the idea was to be racist and keep them out of the fighting because of ridiculous stereotypes about African Americans. The Navy enlisted 11,000 women, and they worked as clerks, radio operators, and pharmacists, and also assembled torpedoes. Okay, but the only women to go to war were the military army nurses. Other than that, they were doing important positions here on the mainland that freed men to fight. So right here, this is just kind of one of the things they used as a recruiting tool. They built this out of wood. It's called the USS Recruit. It's a wooden battleship that was built by the Navy to try and recruit people to join the military, and it actually helps get a lot of people to agree to join. I don't know where that accent came from. I'd like to apologize for that strange accent. Okay, now, as far as our ships going over and being attacked by the Germans, the truth is the Germans could easily take down any merchant ship and a few of our other ships if they were going by themselves. But they weren't ready for any type of destroyer or any other type of majorly manned vehicle. So, basically what U.S. Admiral Sims says is what they would do is use troop carriers and... would use patrol boats and destroyers to work as escorts for cargo ships and troop carriers. Okay, so this is going to limit the number of ships that are sunk in World War I, especially once both sides discover that they can still attack from the air and see exactly where everyone is. Okay, so the fuel administration. They're going to conserve oil and coal, so that there's more for the soldiers and for our ships. It was also during this time period that they introduced daylight savings time to conserve energy. I still don't understand how this is, and so if you want me to explain how we introduced daylight savings time and it made any difference or any difference at all, let me know, and I really have no clue what it is. Now, to pay for the war, we needed money. And so unlike wars today where we just use a lot of blank checks, we sold Liberty bonds or victory bonds to pay for the war. And Americans are going to loan money to the government that would be repaid with interest. The Food Administration, this was under Herbert Hoover, who is a future president, and they had to increase food production while reducing consumption. And Hoover's going to encourage people to build victory gardens so they don't have to use as much food as already being taken out of the market. So the idea is people would just grow their own food. The problem is not enough people followed this, and it's going to cause other problems. So this leads us to the end of today. I hope everyone's doing well. I'll try and work on my pacing next time, but in the meantime, stay safe, stay warm, and stay happy. And I will see you on the other side. Don't cocaine, don't AIDS, and do not COVID. And remember, be safe, but don't be a safe. You are not a place where they can store drugs. Don't be a drug mule. And I'm out.